The connection between Mandy and me wasn't something that happened instantly. It grew over years of facing challenges together and celebrating our victories. We both came from modest beginnings, shaped by parents who worked tirelessly and taught us the values of hard work and perseverance. Mandy's childhood was in Kent, where her father ran a small construction business and her mother was a school teacher. Those early years gave her a deep sense of responsibility and a practical way of seeing life. As for me, I spent my childhood in Sur, a place full of energy from a suburb that was rapidly expanding. My father, a commercial lawyer, played a major role in my life. His ambition and discipline helped shape how I viewed success. My mother, always the quiet strength in our home, supported our family with grace, providing warmth and stability. Their lessons became the bedrock for my future career in project management, a field that balanced strategic planning with emotional intelligence. Mandy and I first met at university, both of us studying business administration. While she excelled in long-term planning and strategy, I found my strength in execution and problem-solving. Our different skills drew us together, and before long, our professional relationship turned personal. Those early days were filled with late nights, bouncing around business ideas, and dreaming about the life we'd create together. It was during one of those sessions that the concept for Alpha Business Consultants, ABC, was born. With the support of my father, both financially and with his guidance, we started our firm, specializing in strategic planning and organizational change. The first few years were far from easy, juggling client demands, managing our growing team, and dealing with the challenges of starting a business tested our partnership in ways we hadn't anticipated. But despite everything, Mandy and I leaned on one another, strengthening a bond we thought was unbreakable. Over time, our relationship evolved from business partners to something much more personal. Each year, Mandy spends roughly 8,000 miles on the road, mostly for short trips to meet clients. Our home, tucked just off the busy M25 motorway, offers a peaceful retreat, even though it's close to the chaos of London's traffic. The house is charming, but a quick drive on the M25 can quickly turn into a time-consuming ordeal. To cope with the frustrating traffic, Mandy has a simple trick: snacks, a soft drink, and her favorite bubblegum pop station. Her car of choice? A bright orange Volkswagen Beetle convertible. It's the latest model with a 2-liter engine, a slick sound system, a black soft top, and leather seats. It's a fun little car, although it tends to accumulate a lot of clutter. Empty drink bottles, candy wrappers, and other random bits. It's amusing to me that she's driving a car built for speeds over 120 miles per hour, yet most of the time, she's either stuck in traffic or crawling along some of the busiest roads in the UK. Her first car, back when we were in college, was an old Volkswagen Beetle. She talks about it with such fondness, and I imagine that it holds some cherished memories, probably involving a few intimate moments shared in that little car. This was before we met, back when she still lived with her parents. I never asked her about it, but I suspect those memories are special to her. When Volkswagen brought the Beetle back a few years ago, Mandy couldn't stop talking about how much she wanted one. So, for her 50th birthday, I took the hint and bought her the top-of-the-line convertible. I even went a step further and splurged on a personalized license plate with her initials and the word "bug" on it. It was an absurd amount of money for a plate, but it made the car feel even more personal. She lovingly called it the baby bug. Even though she adores the car, Mandy isn't always the best at keeping track of things like tire pressure or fluid levels. I made it a point to check those regularly. Some people don't mind a messy car, but I'm not one of them. I clean out empty cups, food wrappers, and other junk. I never brought it up to her. She probably never even noticed, but I didn't mind. I always found enough loose change in the car to grab a couple of beers at the pub later. It's not surprising, considering how both of us are decent at taking care of big things, but tend to overlook the smaller, everyday details. Both of us had comfortable incomes and a stable lifestyle. Mandy, a business consultant, helps companies develop strategies for growth, while I work as a freelance project manager specializing in change management. Most people know me as Terry, even though my real name is actually Dave, not Terrence. It's a nickname I picked up because of my work, where I often have to let people go during times of organizational change. Mandy and everyone else just call me Terry, short for Terminator. We met at university while both studying business administration, and we hit it off right away. Before we even got married, we decided to start our own company, Alpha Business Consultants Limited. We were young and maybe a little naive, but we had a great deal of support, both in advice and finances, from my father, a highly respected commercial lawyer. Sadly, he passed away just a few years ago, not long after we launched the business. He had agreed to become a director of the company, which gave us a solid reputation when dealing with potential clients. In exchange for his involvement, we gave him shares in the company, and he was always ready to lend his legal expertise when needed. In the early days, Mandy and I poured our energy into building the business, helping companies with strategic planning. But as time went on, we realized that our strengths were a bit different. Mandy has an incredible talent for helping businesses plan for the future, while my strength lies in solving problems when things start going wrong. She specializes in the what should happen, and I handle the what happens when it doesn't. Both my father and Mandy felt that Alpha Business Consultants should focus more on strategy rather than execution, so we came to an agreement that I would branch out on my own as a consultant, focusing on organizational change projects. Mandy continued running ABC on her own. Our twin daughters, Linda and Lucy, both left for university a few years ago, which left the house feeling a bit emptier. When they were younger, I had converted a room on the ground floor into an office for the business. It had a sign on the door, and it was meant to be a quiet, private space for either of us to work without interruptions. Over time, it became Mandy's office since I was usually out working directly with clients, while she worked from home. Mandy had about 50 regular clients, and she charged fees based on their needs whenever they called for her consulting services. In contrast, my work didn't always come in a steady flow. I often got referred to projects or worked as an assistant for a larger management consultancy firm. I usually only had one client at a time, and we would work together for weeks or even months, handling big projects like office relocations or corporate restructures. After finishing a project, I typically took some time off, sometimes a few days, sometimes weeks, before the next job came along. Not knowing what was coming next might be intimidating for some, but I got used to it and even came to enjoy those breaks. I'd use the time to read more or improve my cooking skills. The downtime also allowed me to take care of the house maintenance that didn't require a professional, like cleaning Mandy's fish tank. She had read somewhere that having a large aquarium filled with colorful fish could help with her thinking, so she insisted on having one. While she loved the idea, she wasn't the best at keeping up with the maintenance. To her, pH was just a couple of random letters, so I ended up taking care of the tank. I never minded the time alone when Mandy was away on business trips, and she never complained when I worked away for a week on a project. In fact, I think these occasional separations actually helped our relationship, especially after the girls left home. I had hoped that with just the two of us at home, we could revive our social life. Maybe even take romantic weekends to places like Paris or Rome. But as the saying goes, people make plans and the gods laugh. Things took an unexpected turn when Mandy came home one day with little Doug, a Shih Tzu, also known as a Chinese lion dog. Every time I see him, I can't help but think of the old joke about a zoo with only one animal, a dog, and it's a Shih Tzu. At first, I was a little annoyed that Mandy brought a dog into the house without asking me first. Little Doug was cute, no doubt, but I knew right away that I'd end up being the one walking him and taking care of him, whether Mandy was busy or not. When she first got him, little Doug was just a tiny puppy and needed house training. His name, Little Doug, wasn't just because of his size. For a while, he marked his territory everywhere. Mandy absolutely adored him, and he became her little companion. He'd sit on her lap, get petted endlessly while she watched TV, and even curl up next to her on the sofa. He'd park himself next to her at the dinner table, and every morning, he'd be snuggled up in our bed. I tried my best to convince Mandy that little Doug shouldn't be allowed to roam. Mandy didn't seem to hear me when I tried to suggest that little Doug shouldn't freely roam around the house. To keep any semblance of privacy, I had to lock the bedroom door if I wanted to enjoy a bit of peace and quiet. Even then, I had to remember to unlock it afterward, or else little Doug would start barking at me from behind the door. Mandy would join in from inside, howling at me to stop. One Sunday afternoon, as I was cleaning up, I noticed a receipt on the floor next to a plastic bag. It was from the Ansley House Hotel, a well-known country hotel about 20 miles away. The hotel was famous for its restaurant, but its main business was the spa and conference center, hosting seminars, weddings, and corporate events. The receipt didn't offer many details, but the total seemed like something you'd expect for a lunch or dinner for 2 or 3 people. I assumed Mandy had taken some clients there, so I decided not to throw it out. I slipped it into my wallet, thinking I'd return it to her later. After cleaning up the snack wrappers and other junk, I tied up the bag and threw it away. Then, I took the Beetle to the garage for gas and a quick checkup. The next day, Mandy was heading out on a business trip up north and wouldn't be back for a few days. I had some downtime in between projects and was hoping to take her out for lunch at the Fox and Hounds pub, but she said she was too busy preparing for the trip. I was a bit disappointed, as Sundays had always been family days for us, and our daughters still kept up that tradition by calling us every Sunday. When I returned from the garage, I found Mandy in the living room, phone in hand, clearly in the middle of a long conversation with Lucy. I could catch the tail end of it and realized Lucy was going through another crisis. Linda had always been the calm one, steady and laid back, while Lucy had a tendency to make everything dramatic, especially when it came to relationships. I tried to stay calm, offering support but not getting too involved. They both knew they could turn to us for advice, but when it came to emotional matters like crying or gossiping, it was usually Mandy they reached out to first. From what I overheard, Mandy was telling Lucy to let it go, to move on, and not to dwell on things. "There are plenty of fish in the sea," she said, advising Lucy to focus on her life before rushing into anything new. I had no idea what had happened between Lucy and her boyfriend, so I didn't know what kind of advice to offer. Personally, I always believed in the Latin saying, festina lente, hurry up slowly. It means you should take your time and think things through before acting. But I knew Lucy would have to make the decision herself, so I just asked Mandy to say hi to Lucy for me and headed into the kitchen to start preparing Sunday dinner. We usually had roast beef with Yorkshire puddings and fries on Sundays, and I found it relaxing to put everything together, especially with a good bottle of claret to wash it down. At dinner, Mandy wasn't really in the mood to chat, but she did fill me in on what had been going on with Lucy and Linda. Linda was doing great. She was doing well in her relationship and acing her schoolwork. Lucy's situation was more complicated. Her boyfriend had dumped her after catching her kissing someone else. I mentioned that maybe the boyfriend would come around if given some time, but I wasn't too optimistic about any reconciliation. If Lucy started looking for other options, that would be the end of it. Mandy, on the other hand, thought Lucy should just forget about the whole relationship and have some fun elsewhere. After dinner, I took little Doug for his evening walk. Once I made sure the little black bag with his poop was sealed tight, I tossed it in the trash can outside. Later, I settled in front of the TV while Mandy retreated to her office to work on a presentation for a client. I loaded the dishwasher, then went to bed, but I had trouble falling asleep. I was aware that Mandy had stayed up later than me. When I woke up in the morning, though, I wasn't greeted by my wife. Instead, I was met with the foul-smelling dog breath of little Doug in my face. Nothing quite wakes you up like the stench of a Shih Tzu's morning breath. I quickly threw on some clothes, took little Doug out for his morning bathroom break, then joined Mandy in the kitchen. Mornings were never our strong suit, and Mandy needed at least a couple of espressos before she could really function. We made small talk about the weather while waiting for the usual chaos of rush hour on the M25 to subside. After a brief kiss on the cheek, she petted little Doug and hopped into the Beetle, heading out for the day. It wasn't until after she left that I remembered the receipt in my wallet. I decided to leave it on her desk when I got the chance. That's when I noticed the time. I glanced down at the receipt. 10:18 a.m. The amount seemed to match what you'd expect for a night stay. But why? Why would she need a hotel when she was only heading out for a business trip up north? I figured I'd ask her about it later, thinking there would be an easy explanation, but with some free time on my hands, I decided to check my calendar to see what I had planned for the week. It turned out that I was out of town, but Mandy had planned to be away for a few nights. The receipt was from the morning after she left, so it seemed like she'd only made it about 20 miles before booking a room at the Ansley House Hotel. Struck me as odd. If it were a business event, there'd be no need for a hotel room. I could have driven her back home or even picked her up later. I sat in her office, staring at the receipt. Nothing had seemed out of the ordinary lately. We were still intimate regularly, so why a hotel? Was this proof of something more? I had no reason to suspect she was seeing anyone else. But now I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I was missing something. Why would she need a hotel room when I was often gone for work? Could she be doing both? Staying at a hotel and seeing someone else? Or was there a simple explanation I wasn't seeing? I grabbed my phone and dialed the hotel's number, hoping to get some answers. A woman picked up, and I asked if she could connect me to Mrs. Amanda Carmichael. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, "but Miss Carmichael hasn't checked in yet." A brief sense of relief washed over me, but then she added, "Check-in isn't until noon, and it's only 10:30 now. Would you like me to leave a message for her?" I thought about leaving a message, something like, "Your husband called to check up on you," but I realized that probably wouldn't get me any closer to the truth. I politely declined and made myself another cup of coffee. I didn't want to overthink it, but I also didn't want to sit around waiting for an explanation that might never come. I decided I needed to take action. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation, or maybe there was more to it than I realized. Either way, I couldn't stay in the dark. After putting little Doug outside and making sure he had a spot in the garden, I drove to Ansley House Hotel. It was nearly noon when I arrived, and the first thing I noticed was the little Beetle parked in the lot. So Mandy had already checked in. I parked a few roads away and dialed her number. She picked up immediately. "Hey, Terry, how's it going?" Mandy asked. I heard her mention a major accident on the M25, so I calmly responded, "Traffic's been a bit slow, but I didn't hear about any accident." "It's on the M25. You probably missed it," she said. "Oh, I'm just passing Watford. Thanks for checking in," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Okay, call me when you get there," she said before hanging up. I hung up, feeling unsettled. Was she just trying to cover her tracks? Or was this all an innocent misunderstanding? I decided to walk through the hotel and see if I could spot her. If I didn't find her in the public areas, I'd call her room directly and ask to meet her there. As I crossed the lobby, I noticed a bulletin board listing the events for the day. Monday was a quiet day for the hotel, except for one private event scheduled in the spa and fitness center at 7 p.m. Curious about what kind of private party could be hosted at a spa, I approached the receptionist and asked about the event. She seemed caught off guard by the question and politely told me she couldn't provide any details. In other words, it was none of my business. I figured I might have better luck elsewhere, so I wandered over to the lobby bar and ordered a coffee. When I casually asked the waiter about the private event at the spa, he leaned in and gave me a knowing look. "Yeah, you could say it's a group of NTSs," he said. "But that's not all. It's actually a pretty well-known regular event here, hosted by the local club of couples who practice open relationships." I almost choked on my coffee. "Really?" I managed to say, though my stomach had already dropped. My stomach started to churn. "What's the deal with it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shrugged nonchalantly. "If you want to know more, just look up Bottoms Up Club online. It's no secret around here." I stared at him for a moment, processing what he had just said. This was not the direction I thought this would take, but it was becoming clear that there was a lot I didn't know. As I sat there, trying to make sense of the new information, I couldn't help but wonder, was Mandy really involved in something like this? Or was I just jumping to conclusions? I took a quick gulp of my coffee, pulled out my phone, and connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi. Finding the Bottoms Up Club's website was straightforward. Membership was £20 annually, and to attend their events you had to sign up and agree to their terms. The Mellow Monday Mix and Pick event, priced at £49 for single men, was hosted at a nearby hotel spa starting at 7 p.m. The website also outlined the dress code, which included optional masks. By now, I was almost certain Mandy was at the hotel for this event. She seemed like the type to enjoy herself in that kind of setting. I knew I had to find out what was really going on. As much as I didn't want to see my wife with strangers, I needed undeniable proof, whether it was for a divorce or just for my own peace of mind. I knew sitting in the lobby and waiting for her to reveal herself wasn't the best plan. So I finished my coffee and headed out. I dialed the club's number and spoke to another pleasant woman who walked me through the event details. She confirmed that I'd need an ID to get in, reassured me my personal information would be kept private, and mentioned I could buy rubbers and masks on site. The club's name wouldn't appear on any transaction records, only SJB services. When I got home, I checked in on little Doug before changing into something more fitting for the evening. I still wasn't completely sure what I was dealing with, so I took a moment to review our finances online. Sure enough, payments to SJB services had been made over the past year. They seemed to align with Mandy's memberships and the events she'd attended. I printed out the bank statements for later reference. Later that evening, I returned to the hotel, arriving around 8 p.m., and made my way to the spa. At the reception, an attractive middle-aged woman in a floral dress greeted me. She was the same person I had spoken with earlier. After checking my ID, she sold me a mask and some rubbers. Though I had no intention of using them, I needed to play along. She seemed to notice my nervousness and tried to put me at ease. "Just head to the gym," she said. "You're a bit late, so you might have to wait, but everyone's really friendly. If you need anything, just ask. You'll fit right in." I put on the mask and walked through the door into the gym area. The room was dimly lit, with the heating cranked up to create a more intimate atmosphere. Soft jazz played in the background, the volume low enough to keep conversations flowing without being disruptive. The space was filled with about 70 or 80 people, some fully dressed, others half-dressed or completely naked. I spotted a table with refreshments near the entrance, but the real action seemed to be happening around the mats scattered across the room. 8 large white sheets were laid out, each surrounded by groups of people. Couples and groups, some masked, some not. I felt out of place in my full attire, but I needed to stay that way if I was going to get the evidence I needed. I moved closer to one group, watching as 2 young women explored each other's bodies. The crowd around them murmured in approval. In the next group, 2 older couples, their flesh jiggling as they fumbled with each other, gave off the impression of a bizarre, awkward wrestling match. Then I saw her, Mandy. She was in the far corner on a mat, unclothed and entangled with 2 young men. Her face was unmistakable, even without a mask. I could spot the small turtle tattoo on her left ankle from across the room. She was in the middle of it, and the group around her seemed to be egging her on. I wasn't going to confront her. I didn't want to give myself away, so I stayed quiet and focused on recording everything. I'd signed a confidentiality agreement to get in, but that wasn't going to stop me from getting the proof I needed. Mandy's face was visible enough that I could blur out the others later in the video. A man in a black shirt, standing next to me, muttered under his breath, "This is like watching a door get kicked in during a storm," gesturing toward Mandy. "Look at how she's moving." A woman nearby, who seemed to know a bit too much, added, "She's great with a few guys at once. We've been with her a couple of times." My stomach twisted, but I pushed the feeling aside. My focus remained sharp as I captured what was happening on my phone, careful not to draw attention. I knew I had the proof, both in video and from the casual comments surrounding Mandy. I had seen enough. I couldn't stay any longer, and I wasn't about to watch this unfold any further. The woman at the reception seemed surprised to see me leaving so soon, but I made up a quick excuse. "I forgot something," I said, promising I'd be back. As I walked out, my mind was racing. What I had just witnessed was enough to shatter everything. Mandy, the woman I trusted, was involved in something completely foreign to me. The part of me that still clung to some hope tried to rationalize it, but I knew what I had seen. I knew what she was doing. Our once special bond felt completely worthless now. I was still in shock, but as I drove away from the hotel, my body and mind began to process what I had just witnessed. A wave of nausea hit me. My stomach felt hollow, and bile crept up my throat as if I were experiencing food poisoning. Along with that, An overwhelming sadness gripped me so deeply that I had to sit in the car for a few minutes before I could even think about heading home. As time passed, I started to build a mental wall around my grief and anger. It wasn't any easier just because I knew how to handle such emotional shifts. I wasn't going to deny reality. I had seen it with my own eyes. She had slept with other people. Anger surged within me, but I accepted that I needed to face the inevitable changes ahead. Grief and anger would be my constant companions for a while, but I knew I had to act. I wasn't about to waste time stuck in confusion over cause and effect. By the time I got back home, I had already started planning my next steps. I couldn't control what had happened, but I could control how I responded. I would face the changes head-on, and I wasn't going to let them overwhelm me. I would take charge, not just be dragged along by circumstances. I wanted to be proactive, not passive. That night, I took little Doug for a quick walk before trying to numb the pain with a couple of drinks. I didn't sleep well and woke up feeling awful the next day, but I had to keep moving. Little Doug and I were headed to Cornwall. I'd always thought of it as the toe of England, the furthest point southwest, staring out at the vast Atlantic. These days, much of Cornwall had turned into a quiet haven for wealthy retirees who'd bought up the cottages once owned by local fishermen. The fishermen were long gone, replaced by elderly couples like Mr. and Mrs. B, who spent their days walking their dogs and enjoying the countryside. I considered taking little Doug to Belgium, but without a chip and a pet passport, it wasn't an option. For once, I was glad he didn't have a microchip. He couldn't be tracked, and in the end, Cornwall was a lot farther than Brussels anyway. The drive to New took over 5 hours, with a brief stop to let little Doug stretch his legs. I dropped him off at the animal shelter, telling the receptionist I'd found him wandering the streets of N. She quickly recognized him as a Shih Tzu and assured me he'd find a home easily, especially with his cute size. I left, relieved that he didn't seem upset or whiny, just a little confused as we said our goodbyes. Afterward, I decided to find a quiet pub. The man behind the counter at a gas station recommended the White Horse. Took me a moment to realize he meant the nearby White Horse Hotel. I ended up sitting at a corner table with a ploughman's lunch and a pint of good ale. While eating, I checked my phone and called Jim Savage, a senior partner at a management consultancy in S. Jim and I had known each other for years. He'd been a rival since Mandy and I started our business, ABC. Jim was a charming guy, but a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing. When we first started ABC, he'd offered us a cushy job to close down our business and come work for him, knowing full well that he'd probably let us go when it suited him. We'd always turned him down, but we'd kept in touch, meeting from time to time at business events. Jim always seemed to be genuinely interested in what I had to say, even though I knew it was part of his strategy to neutralize us. Despite the urgency of my situation, Jim agreed to meet the next day. When I finally got home that evening, I was exhausted. I planned to call Mandy to tell her about little Doug, but before I could dial, my phone rang. "Hi, Mandy," I answered. "I was just about to call you. I have bad news." I paused for a moment before continuing. "Little Doug somehow got out of the garden and was hit by a truck. I'm so sorry." There was a long pause on the other end before she gasped. "What? Is he okay?" I kept my voice steady. "I'm afraid he's gone. A passerby saw him slip under the gate and run into the road, but the truck driver didn't stop. The truck ran over him, and there was nothing I could do. I buried him in the garden." Mandy sobbed uncontrollably on the phone, muttering about how devastated she was. I couldn't help but feel a dark satisfaction. Honestly, there was a part of me that considered the idea of liquidating little Doug myself, but that seemed too far. After all, he wasn't some wild animal, he was a dog. What really gave me peace was the fact that little Doug wasn't dead at all. He was safe and sound in Cornwall, far from Mandy's knowledge. I expressed my condolences one last time before ending the call. I offered my condolences, suggesting that I could purchase a small headstone for little Doug's grave. This pushed Mandy into another round of tears, and the call ended. She was clearly devastated, and I knew she'd cry for hours mourning the loss of her precious little dog. As I sat back, I couldn't shake the bitter sense of relief that washed over me. At least now, I had some control over this situation. My meeting with Jim Savage went smoothly. After I explained what I needed, he seemed confident that his company would accept the terms I had proposed. He assured me that a corporate lawyer would draft an agreement for my review soon. On my way home, I stopped by a local real estate office to get an estimate of our house's market value. The figure they gave me was higher than I had expected, much more than I thought it was worth. Mandy and I had discussed our retirement plans before, agreeing that we would keep the house and rent it out. We'd even run it by our daughters, and they had supported the idea, as long as we didn't sell. But now, with everything that had happened, I realized I'd need to approach things differently. I didn't bother calling Mandy that night, even though I knew she'd likely be waiting for an update on how she was handling little Doug's supposed death. I had thought about it, but I wasn't in the mood to be sympathetic. She could deal with it on her own. I figured she'd be back the next day. She had said she was near Manchester, but honestly, who knew where she really was? I didn't care. What mattered was that for the first time in a long while, I slept a little better that night. It might have been petty, but I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. The next morning, I briefly wondered where little Doug had actually gone. But then it hit me. He was gone. And I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. I no longer had to feed him, walk him, or clean up after him. That fleeting sense of relief quickly shifted into the realization that I had much bigger problems to tackle. In England, divorce lawyers are called family solicitors, and they specialize in divorce and other family-related matters. There were plenty of options, and they all seemed similar enough. I didn't need someone local, so I set up an appointment with a solicitor in Dorking. The name amused me, and the town wasn't far from where I was. I had time to take care of some things before the meeting, so I spent the afternoon browsing personalized license plates online, visiting a jewelry store, and picking up groceries. I also took a few calls from business associates. By the time I reached the solicitor's office, I was feeling frazzled. Never in a million years did I think I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office discussing divorce. The secretary noticed my tension and offered me coffee, trying to calm me down while I waited. The solicitor who saw me was a middle-aged woman. She listened to my story carefully and advised me not to rush things. For a second, I wondered if she was trying to drag out the process to increase her fees, but I dismissed the thought. In my experience, lawyers aren't in any rush to finish things. They like to rack up billable hours. I told her that the divorce petition could always be withdrawn later, though I had no intention of doing that. We discussed my options, and in the end, we decided to move forward with filing for divorce based on Mandy's infidelity. When Mandy came home that evening, I had already decided I wasn't going to cook for her. I made a spicy beef curry, one of my favorite dishes, knowing she hated it. It worked out perfectly. I also took the opportunity to crack open a couple of pints of my favorite Scottish craft beer. Over dinner, I casually mentioned the new contract I had secured while she was away. I told her I'd be working in Yorkshire for a while, but she didn't seem too interested. She was still upset about little Doug, and when I told her I'd be leaving for Yorkshire the next morning and wouldn't be back until late Saturday night, she seemed disappointed. I didn't want to seem completely heartless, so after dinner, I hugged her and we sat down to watch TV together. She quietly cried over little Doug, and I sat beside her, my beer breath mixing with the curry fumes. My time in Yorkshire turned out to be very productive. The deal had already been finalized over the phone, and all the paperwork was ready for signing. I knew several of the directors involved, and they were thrilled that I had accepted the initial 6-month assignment, with the possibility of a permanent position. They also agreed to cover the cost of my move, temporary accommodation for 2 weeks, and half the rental costs for a place in Yorkshire. Everything was arranged so I could start immediately. Now it was time to distance myself from Mandy even more. After checking into my hotel that evening, I was looking forward to a pint or two of local ale. I didn't want to waste time on the phone with Mandy, but of course, she rang anyway. She had discovered that the fish in our tank had died earlier in the afternoon and was trying to break the news to me as gently as possible. She had no idea I was the one who had stopped feeding them. I had simply stopped caring. "I'm so sorry, especially after everything with little Doug," she said. "I'm sure it's too late now, Mandy," I replied. "Just leave the tank. I'll clean it when I get back." Saturday was a brief stopover at home. I returned early in the morning, but I planned to leave for Yorkshire again on Sunday. I had a long list of things to do, including sorting through paperwork, while Mandy went shopping and made dinner. Kept her distracted. We spent a quiet evening in front of the TV with a couple of glasses of wine. Neither of us was in the mood for anything close. We were both exhausted. To my surprise, I slept deeply that night. When I woke up, the shock that had been hanging over me seemed to have eased. My mind had adjusted to the new reality. The feelings of alienation and despair had faded. The feeling of despair that had weighed on me began to fade, replaced by a quiet resolve to push through and focus on what I could control. Though I still felt a deep emptiness inside, I knew I wasn't lost in grief. I had regained control by concentrating on the immediate tasks in front of me. After lunch, I packed up my car, kissed Mandy goodbye, and drove off to Yorkshire. A few days later, when she was served with the divorce papers, she had no idea it was coming. I knew exactly when it would happen, and I made sure my phone was off that day. It wasn't that I was trying to be cruel. It was just that I was busy. Still, a part of me felt a strange satisfaction in knowing I had a few hours of peace without her calls. After work, I returned to my hotel room, turned my phone back on, and checked the messages and voicemails. The main theme was clear. She was upset, confused, and angry. Without hesitating, I called her back. "What the hell is going on, Terry?" she asked, cutting straight to the chase. "That's exactly what I've been asking myself, Mandy," I replied. "But this all started about a week ago. I don't understand what you're doing, but it needs to stop. This has gone way beyond a joke. It's almost like you're reading from my script," I added. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, clearly confused. "Well, at some point, I started wondering what was going on with you," I said. "But now it's too late to stop. And this has definitely gone beyond a joke." "Are you talking about the Anley House Hotel and the Bottoms Up Club?" she asked, her voice shaking. There was a long pause, followed by a heavy sigh. "I'm sorry, Terry," she said. "I really don't know what to say. I never thought you'd find out." "Well, Mandy, what you don't know can't hurt you, right?" I said, keeping my tone calm. "Well, now I know," she replied. "I know, and it hurts. We need to talk about this," I said. "But it's something we can't do over the phone. Will you come home on Friday?" "I don't think talking will help much," I replied. "I'll be home Saturday, but I need to be back in Yorkshire by Sunday evening." When I returned Saturday afternoon, Mandy looked nervous. I didn't unpack my things, unsure how things would go. I planned to sleep in one of the guest rooms, keeping the option to leave if things got too tense. In situations like this, Brits tend to brew some tea and hope things settle down soon enough. Mandy sat me down in the living room with a cup of tea, and I waited for her to speak. "First of all, I have to admit this whole mess is my fault," she began. "Terry, I didn't say anything. The truth is I gave in to temptation. I stumbled across the Bottoms Up Club by accident, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. You weren't home when I first went, and I was really nervous. I even wore a masquerade mask because I thought no one would recognize me. I thought I could just observe, watch people perform and see the show." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "At first, it was just as I imagined," she said. "But then people started approaching me, and I couldn't resist. It didn't take long before I joined in. It was scary at first, but after the first time, I realized these people were some of the most genuine, kind, and safe people I'd ever met. That's another reason I kept going back. I started to enjoy it. I liked watching others, and I liked being watched when I was with others." Her voice wavered as she finished her explanation, and she looked at me, waiting for my reaction. "I agree, Mandy," I said after a pause. "Being with other people can be fun." She smiled, clearly relieved. "As far as I'm concerned," I added, sipping my tea, "as long as everyone's consenting, you can do whatever you want. No one should judge that." Her smile quickly faded, and I could see the anxiety creeping back into her face. She seemed to expect a certain response, as if she had a plan, and she was going to see it through. Though Mandy admitted she'd made a mistake, there was no real regret in her words, no true remorse. It was clear to me that she wasn't planning to stop. "What I do with other men doesn't change how I feel about you, Terry," she said. "I love you, and our life together is amazing. I just hope you can understand that having fun with other men in a safe space doesn't threaten what we have. If you're not into it, just ignore it. If you're not around, you won't even know." "I think you're mistaken, Mandy," I said, my tone flat. "And honestly, I've already seen more than enough to ignore." She trembled at my words. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I know about the payments to the hotel and the club," I said, staring her down. "Are you saying you saw me there?" she asked, almost incredulously. I locked eyes with her. "A couple of weeks ago, I saw you at the club around 8 p.m. You were with two young guys. Some people mentioned that you enjoy having sex in public." "Oh my God!" she gasped, horrified. "I'm so sorry. I can't believe you saw me. I didn't think you'd ever find out. But please understand, it was always just physical. It was an exciting adventure for me. That's all it ever was. I don't love anyone else, and I never wanted to. Looking back, I should have talked to you about it, but I wasn't sure how to tell you." "Well, Mandy, you're right about that," I said, my voice cold. "I wouldn't have been happy if you told me. Maybe it was more exciting for you because you were hiding it from me. I know you're hurt, and I understand why," she said softly. "But Terry, don't you think filing for divorce is a bit extreme?" "I don't think it's extreme, not with everything you've done," I replied. "You decided to betray me. You chose to give yourself to others, and I can't accept that. I want a divorce." Her shoulders slumped as she sighed deeply. "Can we at least think about what this will mean for everyone before we take this step? I just think we shouldn't rush into it without considering the consequences." "I'm already thinking about the consequences," I said. "We can take some time to think it through, but I don't expect my mind to change." I left Mandy to process things on her own and made my way to the Fox and Hounds for a drink. I've always had a soft spot for pubs, but there was something about this one that never quite felt right. Despite living in the area for years, I wasn't going to miss it. The regulars were a mix of pretentious middle-aged professionals who made me feel like I didn't belong. If I had the option, I'd take a pint of Yorkshire ale over any watery southern beer. I sipped on my tepid, lackluster pint and started thinking through my next move. When I returned, Mandy had already started getting dinner ready. I didn't bother unpacking. Instead, I dropped my bag in the guest room and grabbed a few things I needed from the master bedroom. Dinner conversation revolved around our daughters. Apparently, Lucy had taken Mandy's advice and was now actively looking for someone to replace her ex-boyfriend, who, to Lucy's frustration, had moved on with her best friend. I had no idea what a BFF was, so I asked, and Mandy explained it was short for best friend forever. I had my doubts about how long that friendship would last. "I always thought of you as my best friend," I said. Mandy could tell I was distant, though I wasn't being rude about it. I don't think she fully realized just how much had shifted between us. Maybe she assumed that our earlier conversation had somehow worked out a truce. I wasn't about to correct her. Sunday morning came and I was up early. I made some toast and coffee, packed my bags, and headed out to Yorkshire. Before leaving, I double-checked the car to make sure I hadn't left anything belonging to Mandy, including a few business files I found tucked in the back seat. I had just passed Watford when my phone rang. "Where are you?" Mandy asked. "Did you take the Beetle to the garage?" "No," I replied. "I grabbed the little bug and am heading back to Yorkshire." "I don't get it," she said. "Why didn't you say goodbye? And why take the little bug?" "I just felt like it," I answered. "You were still asleep." There was a pause as she processed what I'd said. "I don't understand," she finally said. "What am I supposed to do without the Beetle?" "You've got other cars," I said. "Well, the one I usually drive." "I'm sure you'll manage," I replied. "Just be careful, and don't mess up the bug." By the next day I bought a red Mazda MX-5 convertible from a dealership in Yorkshire, using the Beetle as a partial trade-in. but I kept the personalized plates. I had all the paperwork sorted and even posted the plates for sale online. Mandy wasn't happy when she found out a week later. She called, furious. "How am I supposed to get my car back?" she demanded. "I sold it," I told her flatly. "What do you mean you sold it?" she shouted. "Actually," I said, "it's mine. My name's on the registration." "This isn't fair, Terry," she said, her voice thick with frustration. "Maybe not," I replied, "but you could say I gave it to you, and taking it back isn't much different from what you did to me." "Don't be petty, Terry," she snapped. "It's not the same. You're being ridiculous. But fine, I understand what you mean. If you stop this nonsense and come home, we can work things out." I didn't respond right away. "I'll come back to you when I'm ready," I said. For the next week, Mandy called me every day, asking me to come back so we could talk and sort things out. The conversation was always the same, until the day she found out I had sold my shares in ABC. "How could you make such a decision on your own?" she screamed. "I'm the second shareholder. You should have consulted me." "Fair question," I replied calmly. "I get that you're angry, and I know my decision affects you, but I didn't need to ask you about selling my shares, just like you didn't ask me before you decided to sleep with other men. I get why you're upset, but what's done is done. You'll have to accept it." "You're a fool," she muttered. A few days later, she called me again, absolutely livid. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. When we started the company, we each owned 50% of the shares. What she didn't know was that I had inherited my father's shares, which increased my stake to 51%. That's when the company's new majority owners froze our accounts and began moving forward with a takeover. Mandy called, furious and panicking. "Do you realize what you've done? ABC had over 200,000 in the bank. Now we've lost control of it. You've ruined our future." "Sorry, Mandy," I said, cutting her off. "But at least you still have your job there." There was a sharp intake of breath, followed by silence. Then I heard her sobbing uncontrollably before the call cut off. I think she eventually figured out that the deal I made with Jim Savage was about more than just the money. In exchange for 51% of the shares, I received twice the average turnover from the past 5 years, plus the equivalent of the company's cash reserves. Jim also offered to keep Mandy on as a consultant for at least 2 more years with a decent salary and performance-based bonuses. Jim wasn't an idiot. He knew it was a smart move to keep Mandy as the face of ABC, even if our personal lives were falling apart. During the divorce, the sale of our home became a major complication. In England, the process of buying and selling property is far from straightforward. Transactions are often linked in a chain, meaning one sale depends on others being finalized first. The highest bid is rarely the final one either. Sometimes a new buyer swoops in with a higher offer just after the official closing date. That's exactly what happened to us. Our top bid was contingent on other deals, and while it seemed promising, a better, unconditional offer came in the very next day. Accepting that offer was a relief for both of us, and I think Mandy was glad to see the sale go through without further delays. At this point, Mandy had fully come to terms with the fact that our marriage was over. The property was transferred to a company called Max Payne Associates, though I made sure that the real buyer's identity remained a mystery. I considered it a smart investment. The house was in a great location, and I planned to rent it out to generate passive income. Now living and working in Yorkshire as a management consultant, I hadn't spoken to Mandy in a while, until she called asking if I had seen her wedding dress. Our daughter Linda and her fiancé were about to tie the knot, and Mandy hoped Linda would wear the same dress she had worn years ago. She was convinced it had somehow been packed in with my things when we separated. "Sorry, Mandy," I said. "I don't have a clue where it is. I always try to be honest. Actually, I took the dress and sold it to a woman in Yorkshire who has a boutique. I wouldn't let my wife keep it after everything, and I sure wasn't going to let one of our daughters wear it. That dress is a reminder of a marriage that's over, and I wasn't going to let any of them walk down the aisle in it." A few days later, Lucy called me, sounding frantic. "Mom's going crazy, Dad," she said. "She found out that the diamond ring you gave her is fake. She thought it was worth a fortune, and now she's devastated. Oh, that's awful, I replied flatly. I bet she never would have known if she hadn't looked. People put so much value on things, and then it hits people hard when they realize those things aren't what they thought. But Lucy wasn't done. Well, the real ring's locked up in a safety deposit box at my bank, she said. Who knows? It might come in handy if I ever find someone special. As I settled into my new life in Yorkshire, I often reflected on how much had changed. The days of planning with Mandy, dreaming of a shared future, felt like distant memories. Those days had been full of hope and ambition. Two young idealists ready to take on the world. But life has a way of peeling back the layers of romance to reveal the complicated mess beneath. In many ways, my time in Yorkshire was therapeutic. The open skies and brisk countryside air felt like a reset button for my soul. My consulting work kept me busy, and with each project, I felt a bit more like myself again. There was something deeply satisfying about solving problems for clients and seeing tangible results. It was the kind of fulfillment my personal life had long since stopped providing. I still thought about Mandy, though less frequently and with fewer pangs of bitterness. Occasionally, I'd catch myself smiling at a memory from our early years together. The way she used to playfully tease me about my love for Yorkshire puddings, or how she'd light up a room with her laugh. But those memories were like faint stars on a cloudy night, eclipsed by the weight of betrayal and the inevitable unraveling of our marriage. One Friday evening, I found myself at a local pub, nursing a pint of ale and watching a game on the telly. The pub was alive with chatter, the hum of conversations creating a comforting backdrop. As I sipped my drink, I overheard a couple of blokes at the next table debating the best way to deal with life's disappointments. One of them, an older man with a weathered face, summed it up simply. You've got to let go of what weighs you down, mate. Otherwise, it'll drown you. His words stuck with me. Letting go had never been my strong suit. I was a planner, a fixer, someone who thrived on control. But life with Mandy had taught me that some things were beyond my ability to repair. Back at my flat that night, I decided to clear out the last remnants of my old life. There was a box of photographs, letters, and other mementos tucked away in a closet. As I sorted through them, I came across a picture of Mandy and me from our university days. We were at the beach, grinning like fools, arms wrapped around each other. I couldn't help but laugh at how young and clueless we looked. I slipped the photo into a drawer, deciding it deserved a place in my life, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a testament to what once was. As for Mandy, I heard through the grapevine that she was still running ABC, though with a significantly reduced workload. Our daughter stayed in touch with both of us, and while Lucy occasionally dropped hints about Mandy's latest escapades, I didn't pry. I had my life to live and she had hers. In the end, I realized that the best way to move forward was to focus on the road ahead, rather than the one behind. Life doesn't come with a map, and sometimes the best you can do is put one foot in front of the other, trusting that the journey will lead you somewhere worth being.